I'll repeat that. We are today talking about civil liberties. So that's which part again? The Bill of Rights. So on Friday, we began by discussing the processes of selective incorporation, I think. Yes? Did we get this? Nod your heads. Good. Okay. So selective incorporation is the process of doing what? Exactly, applying the Bill of Rights to the states. So why do we need selective incorporation? Because the Bill of Rights originally did not apply to the states. It was only for the national government. But what amendment was added that all of a sudden means that now we might apply the Bill of Rights to the states? The 14th Amendment, right? For the first time says this: no state shall deny equal protection of the laws, blah, blah, blah. Right, so why do we call it selective incorporation? Why isn't it just incorporation? Because is that amendment by amendment? Yeah, well, yes, case by case, but really I just wanted you to repeat what Kelly said about piece by piece, because although this case, Gitlow versus New York, was the first to establish selective incorporation, what did it incorporate here? That's the 14th Amendment, which tells us that we can't do that. But no, what is incorporated in Gitlow versus New York? Yeah, it's the right to speech. Is it the whole First Amendment? No, it's just the right to free speech, right? So again, selective incorporation means clause by clause, line by line. And as it is, the Third Amendment, the Seventh Amendment, the 10th Amendment, like, because how could the 10th Amendment be incorporated? But anyway, and the grand jury clause, the 5th, all have yet to be incorporated, meaning those still do not apply, constitutionally speaking, to the states. So it's selective. It's clause by clause, not amendment by amendment, and certainly not all at one time. So Gitlow versus New York, just as a reminder, maybe this is the part that we didn't get to, is a Supreme Court case had to do with this guy who was passing out information about anarchism and like encouraging people to like subvert the government, and he was prosecuted for that, and he claimed it was a violation of his free speech, and the Supreme Court agreed that the First Amendment did in fact apply to the states, and they had to get involved there. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about the Establishment Clause. On your list of cases, Engel versus Vitale, all the way through Santa Fe ISD versus Doe, so everything from the top through Gitlow versus New York. All of these are going to be First Amendment Establishment Clause cases. Somebody tell me what the Establishment Clause says. The government can't prefer a religion. The government can't establish. What does that mean? Like create or set up a national religion. They can't like favor religion. Anyway, so all of these first 6 cases are Establishment Clause cases. And before I get started, I think it's important for you to hear this message. So there are going to be a few things you're going to hear about in the next couple of minutes that you might go, we do that in our school district, or they do that at Texas A&M University. That's unconstitutional. And the answer is yes. There are some things that we do in our school district and that Texas A&M University does at their university that are contrary to the established precedents of the Supreme Court. And it's probably okay. Now, if you are personally offended or find that your rights have been violated anyway, do not, like, far be it from me to discourage you from, like, bringing suit against the district if that was what you felt like was important. But I just want to remind you that federalism exists for a reason, right? Remember, why did the Founding Fathers create these multi-layers of government? Because they felt like who knew the rights or who knew the needs of its citizens the best? The smaller government, the states, or even more specifically the local governments, right? So communities have typically had their own values, like the kinds of clothes that you see college girls walking down the streets of College Station are very different than the kinds of things that we would see somebody, I don't know, in like rural Wyoming, you know? Like there are different community standards about like what's okay and what isn't okay and the kinds of things that we value, and that's okay. The national government literally, they wanted that to be possible. They wanted individual like locations to be able to do that. So unless someone is hurt by something, unless someone brings complaint, the fact that we've established a Supreme Court precedent that says whatever, X, Y, and Z is unconstitutional, does not mean that the national government goes into every single high school and college around the country like looking, you know, to try to punish them. Until somebody brings it up, hey, this is a problem here, the national government kind of stays out of it most of the time. Does that make sense? So, like my hometown, 2 years ago, maybe it was just 1 year ago, there was actually a lawsuit brought against my high school for something they did at graduation. We'll talk about it in a little while. That was fairly clearly unconstitutional. And it was kind of shocking to me, not because that it was shocking it was unconstitutional, that was pretty clear, but it was shocking because my hometown is really, really homogenous. It's a really small town. It's like 88% Hispanic. There are 3 churches in town. Almost everybody goes, there's 2 of them are Catholic. Almost everybody goes to the Catholic churches. And then there's one Baptist church. And I literally didn't know anyone who didn't like go to church on Sundays, and like no, not a single person. It's a very, very close-knit community. But apparently somebody moved in for whom like those standards weren't acceptable to them, and that's okay. So then they raised suit, and my school district settled, meaning that they just accepted a fine and then like changed their practices. They didn't like go to the Supreme Court or anything like that. But so that's like the thing. So don't like panic if you're going like, we do that and that's unconstitutional. Like, you're right, maybe we do, but if it doesn't upset you and if that's like in line with the values of you and your family or whatever, then like it's totally fine. That's the way that federalism is supposed to work. But again, there are constitutional precedents that if ever it were to be challenged, the district would have to like do. Okay, good. Moving on. Public service announcement over. Okay, Engel versus Vitale is the first case. This is one that you do need to know. I want to remind you that on this list, the cases that are underlined are the ones that you need to memorize the names of as well as the precedent. And then the ones that aren't underlined, you just need to know what the court said, not necessarily the name of the case specifically. So here we have Engel versus Vitale. This dealt with a New York State law that required every school day to begin with the following prayer. Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence on Thee and beg Thy blessings upon us, our teachers, and our country. So we're going to do a thumbs up, thumbs down situation here. Thumbs up means you think it's okay. Thumbs down, it violates the Constitution. Will you please show me how you think the Supreme Court found? This one's easy. We've come a long way from Engel versus Vitale. Right, the Supreme Court found that this was an unconstitutional violation of the Establishment Clause. We cannot have school-led prayer in schools. The school cannot come over the PA and have this prayer that everyone's going to bow your heads at your desks, children. We can't do that. Violation of the Establishment Clause. So again, you could already label all of these first 6 cases. This is First Amendment Establishment Clause. And for this one, the topic is school-led prayer, and then the decision is what? Unconstitutional. Can't do that. This one's pretty simple. We're going to get to more complicated ones in a second. Okay, now we're going to do Epperson versus Arkansas. This had to do with an Arkansas state law that forbade the teaching of evolution in schools. So you cannot teach Darwin's theory of evolution. I want to highlight the fact that it doesn't say anything about what you teach in creationism. It just simply says you cannot teach evolution. Evolution is not a religious idea, but there's no mention of religion in the law itself. Nevertheless, it was challenged by some school teachers. And what do you think? Did the Supreme Court say that this policy, this law forbidding the teaching of evolution in schools, is it okay? Or did it violate the Establishment Clause? So you're going to vote thumbs up or thumbs down. Policy is okay, thumbs up. Violates the Establishment Clause, thumbs down. Yeah, in fact, this one was found to be in violation of the Establishment Clause, primarily because it was clear that the school district, or excuse me, that the state had made this law with the purpose of promoting creationism. It wasn't a religion-neutral law. There was a clear purpose to try to advance religious ideas or inhibit non-religious ideas, and therefore it was unconstitutional. This one's evolution in schools, cannot be banned. There we go. Okay, then there's Lemon versus Kurtzman. We talked about this one when we did Washington versus Trump. Do you guys remember that? Nod your head if you vaguely. Okay, good. And you might remember that this was a case about a school or a state that was going to allow federal or state funds to pay for private school teacher salaries, so long as those teachers were teaching state-approved subjects. So they didn't teach religion all day long. They taught whatever they could teach in a public school. Then they could have their salaries paid for by the state. But this was challenged. And it went to the Supreme Court and established the Lemon test. Do you guys remember the Lemon test? Yeah, so it's a 3-part test. And we're going to remember each of those 3 parts. Well, here I am live and in person explaining it. So the 3-part test, the Lemon test, begins with the question, is there a secular purpose to the law? Is there a secular purpose to the law? And in this case, what did the Supreme Court find? Yeah, the secular purpose was to help relieve overcrowding in public schools, no big deal. Then the second thing is there a secular effect? So does the effect of the law purely secular, or does the effect of the law get involved in religion? And in this case, this one was a little bit muddier because one of the concurring justices found that in fact they did think it had a religious effect. But the majority opinion in Lynn versus Kurtzman said, yeah, secular effect. There's no significant effect on religion by paying, teacher salaries. But the third part of the test, do you remember it? It's entanglement, right? And here's where the Supreme Court found that this particular law ran afoul of the Establishment Clause, because it would have required the state to be involved in the hiring processes of private schools, to review private school curriculum, to make determinations between what was religious and what wasn't religious, and so on. And that all that entanglement was too much involvement. There was that supposed to be wall of separation. You guys have read that word before? The wall of separation. It was too much entanglement, and so therefore it fell. So this is the number one most important test for the Establishment Clause. The Lemon test is the one we refer to most of the time. There are two more tests we're going to learn, but the Lemon test is the most important one. And remember, it has three parts. First part, secular purpose. Second part, secular effect. And third part, entanglement, right? And so we answered those questions to decide if something has violated the Establishment Clause. So there we go, Lemon versus Kurtzman. Yeah, that particular policy was found unconstitutional because it violated the entanglement portion. Because that's the part where it was found unconstitutional. To remind me when I first started teaching this class, and I didn't always remember all the answers. Now you know my PowerPoint slides are my clip notes. Okay, so then we'll do Allegheny County versus the ACLU. So this involves the county courthouse and some Christmas decorations that they displayed, and there's some pictures here of those Christmas decorations. So on the outside of the courthouse, you can see there's these giant arches. They go all the way around the building, and all the way around they have a whole bunch of different winter holiday symbols. There's Christmas trees, there's menorahs, there's snowmen and reindeer, there's a Santa Claus, there's a whole bunch of different, they really like their holiday decorations in Allegheny County, New York. Anyway, but inside the courthouse, the only decorations that they had were right here. So you walk in the front doors, there's this grand staircase in front of you, and right there in the center of the staircase is a nativity scene, all surrounded by poinsettias, and there's a banner up here that reads, "Glory to God for the birth of Jesus Christ." So on the outside, all kinds of different symbols. On the inside, just the nativity scene. Glory to God for the birth of Jesus Christ. So this was challenged as a violation of the Establishment Clause. What do you think? The policy was okay, or the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional? The answer in this case is that it was ruled unconstitutional, and this created a new test called the endorsement test. This created a new test called the endorsement test. And the endorsement test says this: look, it's not about the nativity. It's okay, the court has ruled many times that it's okay for schools and courthouses to display a nativity scene as part of their holiday decorations. Totally fine. The problem is that the nativity was put in a place of honor and had a banner telling people, praise God, or whatever, telling them that this is a religious thing they should be doing. So that's why the endorsement test says that if anything the government does shows favor or preference or promotion of religion over non-religion, or of a religion over another religion, then it's going to come afoul of the Establishment Clause. So I want to repeat, this precedent does not say that we can't have a nativity scene in public places. The court has upheld that nativity scenes are okay under certain circumstances. The problem here was that its placement showed preference, showed it's being promoted, so it's being endorsed. And so this is the endorsement test. Everybody's good? Okay, so now we're going to do Lee versus Wiseman. This was a high school that each year invited a different clergy member to give the invocation at graduation. So one year it would be a Catholic priest, and then a rabbi, and then a Methodist minister, and then a whatever, you name it. Every year they had somebody different. And the prayer they gave was always very non-denominational, Creator, please bless these students and fulfill their, I don't know, something very ambiguous, okay? But somebody complained and said, hey, we don't like that there's a clergyman giving this prayer at our graduation. And the Supreme Court, I didn't have this one covered up, so as you already can tell, the Supreme Court ruled that was unconstitutional, and it created the third test called the coercion test. It creates the third test called the coercion test. And the language of the Supreme Court is here. The coercion occurs when the government directs a formal religious exercise, in this case a prayer, in such a way as to oblige the participation of objectors. Because think about it, if you're at that graduation and you don't want to pray, what are your choices? I mean, like, sit there and look awkward, or like, but that's kind of you're being forced to participate, right? You're being forced to sit there and listen to this prayer. So what, like, start talking or like be disruptive? We might get thrown out if you do that because you're being disruptive. And even if you don't get thrown out, it's like makes you feel bad to like be so clearly like antithetical to what's going on like all around you. Or you could just not go to graduation. That's not really an option. So there was this idea that the fact that it was being done at a school function when everyone is there, kind of a captive audience, that was too much coercion, even though it wasn't being led by the school, even though the students, were involved in the choice of whatever, that didn't matter, that it was still too much coercion, therefore violates the Establishment Clause. So then last but not least, let's do Santa Fe ISD versus Doe. This has to do with at school football games. The students each week would vote, like the student body would vote amongst itself to choose a student representative. And then that student would go and deliver a prayer before the game. So before the game, the student would go up to the press box where they have the PA system, and they would be allowed to use the PA, and the student would offer a prayer, again, something non-denominational, kind of ambiguous, whatever. Like for the safety of the football players or whatever. And then the game would go ahead and get started. So the school doesn't choose the student. The school doesn't, there's no school administrator giving the prayer. It's just at the game, a student comes and uses the PA system. So do you think that this is okay or unconstitutional? Okay or unconstitutional? I have a hint here. Think about the coercion test. Yeah, this one is unconstitutional. Unconstitutional. And the reason is that, again, if you just showed up at that game and you didn't want to participate in the prayer, it's being spoken over the loudspeaker. Again, you can be disruptive or be rude or feel super awkward. You don't really have a choice to not participate other than just not going. And then there's also, if you just showed up and you heard the prayer over the PA, wouldn't you expect or understand that the school had supported or approved of this particular prayer if the school was allowing them to use the loudspeaker? Even if that wasn't the case, if it's the impression that it gives, again, that's sort of erring on the problem or on the side of coercion. So this one failed as well. Okay, here are some other Establishment Clause rulings. You don't need to have all these down, just some ideas of other things the court has said. It's okay to allow private school students to ride public school buses so long as the bus doesn't go out of its way. Like if it happens to pick up in one neighborhood and pass a private school on the way to the public school, it can stop and drop the kids off. That's not a violation of the separation of church and state. You can't require students to say the Pledge of Allegiance, although you can you can play the Pledge of Allegiance every day. You can't require a prayer or a Bible reading, even if you allow kids to be exempt with a note from their parents, again because of coercion. You can't require teachers to display the Ten Commandments in their classrooms, even if the Ten Commandments posters themselves are provided by private donations. It is okay, I want to repeat, to have a nativity scene on public grounds so long as it's part of this seasonal decoration vibe and there's no preference given to the religious part. You can't have a, quote, moment of silence for prayer or meditation. That's part of why at the beginning of school every day they just say, please stand for the moment of silence, and they don't say anything about what you're supposed to do in the moment of silence. Because there were schools that passed law, or that there was laws passed that said, and so the school day would begin, when I was in high school, my school day began, please rise for the moment of silence for prayer and silent meditation. And they're telling us that we're supposed to pray, and that was clear preference for religion, and so that was not allowed. You can't deny school facilities to an after-school religious club. So there was a principal who was trying to be super careful to not violate the Establishment Clause, and so he refused to allow a religious group to meet on campus. And it turned out that itself is a violation of the Establishment Clause. Because if you allow other student groups to meet on campus, and if this student group meets the requirements to become a student group, then they have to be allowed to meet there too. Interestingly, it's this precedent that was cited when our school created the GSA Club, the Gay Straight Alliance. So a group of students who wanted to found it, they cited this precedent and the fact that Consol allowed religious clubs to meet on campus, that they had to then therefore also allow the GSA to meet, and the district couldn't say no. There was a law forbidding animal sacrifice. So this town in Florida, a weird religious, a weird religious group I never heard of in my whole life. It's I don't know. It's two words that aren't English. And they came, and like part of the religious ceremonies involved animal sacrifice. They like, slit the throat and drain the blood. I don't know. And the town was conservative and didn't like it and just wanted it to go away. And so they passed a law that banned like the ritual slaughter of animals, but did not ban like hunting or trapping, or like even wouldn't have criminalized like if you just killed an animal in your backyard, like for funsies, that wouldn't have been a crime. But like doing it in a religious ceremony was not okay. Anyway, the Supreme Court ruled that that law violated the Establishment Clause because the point of the law was clearly to like discriminate against this particular religion. Like if they wanted to just protect the animals, they would have made a much different law, and so therefore that wasn't okay. And then it's okay to have 10 commandments at state capitals. They just can't be like in a place of, I don't know. Moving on. Okay, now we're going to the Free Exercise Clause. This is Reynolds versus the U.S. through Oregon Employment Division v. Smith. So 3 cases now. The Free Exercise Clause, Reynolds v. Smith, and the next 3. So this is the Free Exercise Clause. Nope, get low is not. Nope. Yes. Oh, no, Near versus Minnesota, sorry, that's expression. I'm sorry. So it does not include Near. So it's the next 3 cases. This is the Free Exercise Clause. Yeah, get low. Which one is get low? That was free speech, right? All of these are selective incorporation. All of these are applying the Bill of Rights to the states. But get low, we just remember, is the one that establishes selective incorporation, and it focuses on free speech, which we're going to get there. Yes, I know, get low is in the wrong place. I'm sorry. Okay, so we'll start with Reynolds versus United States. This is an 1879 case, so it's really old. And it involved a group of Mormon, like fundamentalist Mormon people who were suing the U.S. government, saying that the like anti-polygamy laws was a violation of their like free exercise of their religion. And what do you think the government said? Is banning polygamy okay, or a violation of the Free Exercise Clause? Banning polygamy okay, or violating the Free Exercise Clause? In fact, the Supreme Court ruled that banning polygamy was okay. And I want you to think about why that might have been. Think about the Equal Protection Clause cases, the rational basis test, intermediate scrutiny, and strict scrutiny. What is the first thing the government has to prove if it wants to discriminate against you? A reason, right? They have to prove a reason. The hurting other people is the reason for strict scrutiny, usually. They have to prove a reason. So remember, all of our rights can be abridged if there's a good enough reason to do so. And so the Supreme Court in this case ruled that the state's obligations to promote health, safety, order, and public morality was enough to give them the right to like ban polygamy. Interestingly, it was Reynolds versus the U.S. was cited by the opposition in the Obergefell v. Hodges decision. So like when the Obergefell decision said that all the states had to recognize gay marriage, the defendants in those cases who didn't want that to happen, they cited Reynolds versus the U.S., saying that the states had the right to like uphold the moral public morality of their of their people, and could therefore ban it. The court didn't buy it, but that's what the idea. Okay. Then there's Wisconsin versus Yoder. It's kind of fun to say. Wisconsin versus Yoder. This deals with a Wisconsin law that required students to be in public schools or in school through the 10th grade. So to go all the way through the 10th grade. But the Amish community in Wisconsin, they didn't really want to they wanted to pull their kids out after the 8th grade. They felt like after the 8th grade, there wasn't anything else their students really needed to learn, like in high school, and that they would be exposed to too many like ideas they didn't believe in and technology, and that they'd rather use those like 9th and 10th grade years to teach them like Amish community stuff that they needed to know. But the state of Wisconsin said, no, you can't violate the law. You have to keep them in the school until 10th grade. It's only 2 years after all. And so it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. So what do you think the Supreme Court says? Is the Wisconsin law okay? Or does it violate the Amish people's free exercise? Okay, or violates their free exercise. I'm surprised you all think this is so clear-cut. You're right, but it's not as clear-cut as you think. So the Supreme Court does say that this particular law violates their free exercise. But there's a big but. Yes, I know I said big but. And the big but is this. The Amish people weren't trying to say they didn't want to go to school at all, right? They weren't trying to say that they wanted their kids to stay home forever. They simply said that they didn't want them to go to 9th and 10th grades. That was required, and they wanted to pull that after 8th grade. So first, the Supreme Court establishes that the states do have a right and like a reason and an obligation to promote public literacy, public education. And so until at some point, like if I said I didn't want my kids to go through 4th grade, then the state's right or like reason or necessity to promote public education would be supreme. But once we get to the 8th grade, now all of a sudden you've been reasonably well educated at the 8th grade, I mean, like you've got a fairly basic foundation of like civics, and there's like you can read, and I'm not saying that you would be like enough educated to go to college in the 8th grade, but remember, these are Amish people. They're going to go and live on their farms and like whatever. So at that point, after the 8th grade, the Supreme Court ruled that the state's like logic that they need to promote education was no longer strong enough. Like really, what difference is 9th and 10th grade going to make in terms of like promoting public education? And so when at that point, then we consider the religious free exercise as being supreme. That one was ruled unconstitutional. Okay, let's do Oregon Employment Division versus Smith. This is when you need to know the name of the case. This involves a Native American man, and he goes one weekend to the reservation, and he participates in a religious ceremony that involves the use of peyote, which is a strong hallucinogenic drug. Although it's legal for use on reservations, it's recognized as part of the religious ceremony. And he comes back, and then the next week or two, he is drug tested at work. Like, it's a random drug test. They just do it all the time. Like, he was selected. And he fails the drug test, and he's fired. And then he applies for unemployment benefits. He wants the state to, like, if you get laid off, like, through no fault of your own, you can apply for unemployment benefits, and they'll give you a little bit of money every week, like, while you look for a job to help kind of get you through. But you don't qualify for those benefits if you're fired because you, like, refuse to show up to work, or because you curse out your boss, or because you whatever. You get the point. Anyway, so he applies for unemployment benefits, and he's denied. Hey, you failed a drug test. Like, you don't get these benefits. And he says that this is a violation of his free exercise, that the government is discriminating against him on the basis of a religious practice. So what do you think? Does the Supreme Court say that the government policy, like not giving him his benefits, is okay? Or does that violate his free exercise clause? In this case, the Supreme Court says it's okay. The Supreme Court rules, hey, you can't break a law just because you say your religion tells you to. The law is clear that these are controlled substances that disqualify you from receiving those benefits. We're not punishing you for using the peyote. No one's ever going to come into your religious ceremony and like arrest you and take you to jail for being on having this hallucinogen. But the law is fairly clear. There's a clear reason for the state to pass this law. It doesn't just include peyote. It includes a whole bunch of drugs that are like clearly a detriment to like health and safety if they're going to be used publicly. And so therefore the state law is supreme to your free exercise. So they found in favor of the state. Some other policies or other rulings that have been issued. There was somebody who was drafted for the Vietnam War, and the form, if you want to be a conscientious objector, that means that you don't want to like participate, you don't want to fight in the war. Like when you're drafted, you want like a clerical job or something. The form begins with like identify your religion here, and then answer these other questions. And this guy marked none on religion. But then he answered all these other questions. It was like his moral belief that fighting was not okay. And the draft board like threw it out. They said, no, you can't be a conscientious objector because it's not a religious thing. You're not religious. You said so yourself. And he appeals, and the Supreme Court agrees. This is kind of like how Hernandez versus Texas said, look, I know the law says race, but ethnicity counts too because it's like a discriminated class. Well, and here the Supreme Court says, look, I know this is about religion, but if you have strongly held moral beliefs, just because you don't call them a religion doesn't mean that they're not protected by the religious free exercise clause. The Supreme Court said that the Air Force can ban the wearing of a yarmulke while in uniform. Although this might change, and I think if it ever appealed again, because it was just a year ago that the court allowed in the Army for people to wear certain religious headgear as well as wear short beards. So I think that might change. And then a law that required the Amish to have like electric lights on their buggies, which is like against their religion because they don't believe in electricity, was found to be constitutional because if the buggies go on public roads, then the like public interest and safety outweighs the like desire not to touch electricity or whatever. Okay, so let's just do a couple of like quick scenarios. So if in class, I really am concerned about your progress on this test, and so I pass on the test and I say, all right, everyone, please bow your heads and pray for divine guidance during the test. Would I violate your First Amendment rights? Would that be a violation of the free exercise clause or the establishment clause? The establishment clause. What would I have to do to violate your free exercise right? Yeah, if you are bowing your head and I say, stop that, you have to take this test, don't you know? Like, come on, separation of church and state here. Well, then that would violate your free exercise clause rights. What if we're having, it's an athletic event and the team circles up and decides to say a prayer and the coach walks over and joins them, you know, like holds hands or joins the huddle and says the prayer along with the team. Is that okay or a violation of the First Amendment?
But it's not.
Yeah, it happens a lot, but it's not actually constitutional. Why not? First of all, what does it violate? Free exercise or establishment? Establishment. Why? It's the endorsement test, right? It's not coercion. If the students organize and lead the prayer themselves, they're on the field, they're not using the PA system, they're just doing this amongst themselves. It's not coercion. But once the coach comes and joins, puts their hands around, you know, gets involved in the huddle, like now what happens? Now there's this like endorsement, this preference that where the school is saying we agree with this. So just remember, if someone didn't want to participate, they would feel left out, right? They would feel like they weren't part of the team. Now, can team members choose on their own to go off and say a prayer? Can the coach stop them? No, but so that the coach can't join them or say, okay, everyone, now let's huddle up. We're going to say that like they can't do that. Okay, we're going to skip all those. All right, so last but not least, we're going to start talking about free expression today, and this is going to go from Neer versus Minnesota all the way through Miller versus California. So it includes Miller versus California, does not include McDonald versus City of Chicago. So this is First Amendment free expression, Neer versus Minnesota through Miller versus California. Now when I say free expression, I'm combining free speech and free press, right? Because constitutionally they're treated basically the same way. And the Supreme Court kind of divides speech or expression into two categories. There's pure speech, which is like speech that I say with my mouth or that I write with words. And then there's speech plus, which is any time that I'm sending a message alongside some kind of action, a thing that I'm wearing or a thing that I'm doing or a place that I'm going, something like that. So there's pure speech, that's just words I say or words I write. And then there's speech plus, that's expression plus some kind of action. Which time do you think it's easier for the government to regulate? Everyone's got it wrong all day long. Think about it. Which time do you think it's easier for the government to regulate? When it's speech, pure speech, or when it's speech plus? Speech plus. It's speech plus, right? Because pure speech, just my words, it's pretty hard to really interfere with something the government's doing or needs to do with just my words. But when I combine words with actions, now there's a higher likelihood that I might be interfering with a government thing they need to do. And it's easier to regulate speech plus than it is to regulate pure speech. So, okay. We're going to begin with Neer versus Minnesota. This case involves an independent, really small newspaper that was published, and it had been sued successfully for libel over and over and over again. What's libel? Yeah, when you print false information, you knowingly print false information about someone and it hurts their reputation in some way, damages them. That's libel. So this newspaper, it was like a gossip rag. I mean, it was a horrible, like immoral, unethical publication. So it published information about all kinds of people, and it wasn't true, and it did all the. It was really horrible. It had been sued for libel successfully. It had lost all these cases over and over again. So the state of Minnesota shuts them down. Says you have you cannot pass go, do not collect $200. You are all done publishing. Too many libel cases, you're done. You're not going to be able to publish anymore. And it goes to the Supreme Court. And what do you think the Supreme Court says? Oh, it's up there. Okay. That you can't shut them down. And this establishes the doctrine of no prior restraint. This establishes the doctrine of no prior restraint. That is, we can keep suing them and fining them and punishing them for libel 1,000 times if we need to, but we can't stop them from printing it before they do it. We can't punish them before they've done something wrong. So we cannot stop them ahead of time. And so then the New York Times versus the U.S. is just an extension of that very same idea. So the New York Times versus the U.S., you might remember this in U.S. history. The New York Times gets a set of documents that have been leaked, classified documents that came from the Pentagon. They're called the Pentagon Papers. And they're historical documents that like tell all the secrets about what the U.S. was doing in Vietnam, like a decade prior to this happening. And the New York Times begins to publish them, and President Nixon seeks an injunction, tries to stop them from publishing any more of the documents, saying this is damaging to our reputation, you can't do this, they're classified. So it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court reaffirms the doctrine of no prior restraint. Right, so we can punish them if they publish anything that is a crime. For example, it's a crime to publish information that is classified that like endangers troops. So like if they had like up-to-date information about where a particular division of the army was, they publish that, they can be punished. But we can't punish them until they've published it. And so that reaffirmed no prior restraint. So we will pick up with Schenck versus the U.S. and the rest of it on Thursday.